Wait a minute, I think I'm having the idea now. Such ever-readied white generational barbaric outbursts against a simple people captured, shipped off, enslaved, and then, even upon being emancipated, faced with the severest hate and segregation, could only undoubtedly have been the outcome of serious generational indoctrination, an indoctrination of hate, where even the cruel death or brutal murder of the hated is seen as victory or some grand accomplishment. And for what? What, of course, could be more irrational, dim, and barbaric in the world?
They came on the first day of January and they did not stop burning and shooting and hanging and lynching until January the 7th.
June 1st, 1921 was the day Tulsa's Greenwood district, known as the Black Wall Street, was left in ashes. In a span of 24 hours, the wealthiest black community in America was reduced to rubble. The Tulsa massacre was a brutal reminder of the deadly consequences of racial hatred and economic envy. As the smoke cleared, the true extent of the devastation became clear. 35 city blocks destroyed, over 1,200 homes reduced to ash, and an estimated number of 300 lives lost.
What's the big deal about Tulsa? What makes Tulsa significant than any other city? Well, you've come to a place where not only a terrorist attack occurred, but that terrorist attack, there was no justice that followed that terrorist attack.
The survivors would pick up whatever piece was left of their lives forever changed by the trauma of that day, says Ruth Avery, a survivor of the Tulsa massacre.
I never thought I'd see the day when my community would be destroyed. It was like the world was coming to an end.
The Tulsa massacre was a tipping point in American history, exposing the dark underbelly of racism and oppression that continues to haunt us today. But Tulsa was not an isolated incident. From Rosewood to Elaine and so many other cities, the pattern of racial violence and destruction repeated itself. Tulsa was just the beginning. Across America, so many thriving black cities and towns were targeted, destroyed, and erased from history. Their stories silenced, their legacies lost, until now. The destruction of black cities and towns was a result of systemic racism, white supremacy, and economic envy. There were quite a number of these towns then, over 50 black cities and towns, blooming with all kinds of development and amenities for the hardworking black Americans who were living in them and endeavoring all they can to keep their communities habitable. These communities were thriving independently with successful businesses, schools, and cultural institutions. But the success of these cities was seen as a threat to white dominance. Instead of emulating from the good works they had noticed going on in these black towns, white Americans resorted to doing just what they're known to do best: destruction, chaos, and death. In those days, violence, intimidation, and forced displacement were the weapons used by white communities to maintain marginalization and racial control on blacks by every means. What it feels like to be black was nothing short of unearthly pain for our black ancestors in that era. However, before we go forward, kindly consider subscribing if you are yet to. Hit the thumb button in front of you and share with friends and families to keep spreading consciousness. Your support means a lot to us. Now let us dive into the events of this dark history of the thriving black cities that were destroyed by whites, starting with 1. Tulsa, Oklahoma, Greenwood District.
I will never forget the violence of the white mob when we left our home. I still see black men being shot, black bodies lying in the street. I still smell smoke and see fire. I still see black businesses being burned. I still hear airplanes flying overhead. I hear the screams. I have lived through the massacre every day. Our country may forget this history, but I cannot.
During an emotional testimony on Capitol Hill on Wednesday, Fletcher, who is now 107, recalls her memories of the two-day massacre that left hundreds of black people dead. In the early 1900s, Greenwood was a beacon of black excellence, with over 300 businesses, including banks, hotels, and newspapers. Tulsa, Oklahoma, was founded in 1882, and by the early 1900s, it had become a thriving oil town. Greenwood was a self-sufficient community with its own schools, hospitals, and newspapers. It was a place where black people could thrive, free from the racial tensions of the time. But as Tulsa grew, so did racial tensions. The white residents had become increasingly resentful of Greenwood's success, although segregation laws had enforced separation between black and white communities. Despite segregation laws, racial tensions remained high, and in one occasion of racial clashes, whites had unleashed their pent-up fury against the African American community, revealing deep-seated animosity and hostility. It all started on May 31, 1921, when a 19-year-old shoeshiner named Dick Rowland entered a Drexel building, an office located at 319 South Main Street in Tulsa. He needed to use a public bathroom, but because he was a black, segregation laws restricted him from using facilities located at the down part of the building, so he had to use the bathroom at the top. Getting there required taking the elevators, and the 19-year-old shoeshiner stepped into the elevator. On getting there, he met 17-year-old Sarah Page, a white lady who was working as the elevator operator. The chance encounter between the two individuals sparked a chain of events that would change the city forever. According to Page, Rowland grabbed at her arm and attempted to kiss her, prompting her to push him away and flee the elevator in fear. But Rowland's version of events told a different story. He claimed to have simply tripped and stumbled into the elevator, denying any wrongdoing. As the news of the incident spread like wildfire, the white community seized upon Page's account, fueling racial tensions and outrage. The media sensationalized the story, portraying Rowland as a criminal and Page as a victim. Some witnesses reported hearing Page scream and seeing Rowland flee the scene, while others whispered that the encounter was consensual. The truth, however, remained elusive, lost in the chaos and destruction that followed. Knowing definitely well that the event might make him the target of an angry white mob, Rowland fled to his mother's house in Greenwood for refuge. Unfortunately, the police located and arrested him. In no time, rumors that Rowland will be lynched began spreading like wildfire, and by 7:30 p.m. on that same day, hundreds of residents were gathered outside the courthouse. At exactly 8:30 p.m., 3 men entered into the courthouse demanding that Rowland be handed over to them. But McCullough, the newly elected local sheriff, sternly refused and sent the 3 men out. By 9:30 p.m., the crowd had swelled into thousands, and the sheriffs vastly outnumbered. It was about this time that a group of 50 to 60 armed black citizens arrived at the courthouse in order to support the sheriffs. And again, the sheriffs turned down their offer. Sadly, their arrival had prompted many of the white citizens to head home for their guns. At 10 p.m., a second group of black armed men arrived to support the sheriffs as well, but again, they were turned down. As they were leaving the courthouse, a white man approached one of the black armed men, calling him a racial slur, and at the same time trying to take his gun, thereby sparking an altercation. In an instant, the situation escalated. A single gunshot pierced the air, and chaos erupted. Panic and violence spread like wildfire, unleashing a maelstrom of gunfire, shouts, and screams. Both sides began to fire, and the small group of black citizens was outnumbered 20-1. As a reason, this group of black citizens were forced to retreat towards their neighborhood, Greenwood, in an attempt to escape the violence and find safety. Unluckily, the gunfight followed them the whole way, thereby leading to massive killings of innocent black citizens. Calling the incident a Negro uprising, the local police deputized over 500 men, many of whom were members of the lynched mob. These new deputies were instructed to arm themselves and shoot any black they met on the street. The violence spread throughout Tulsa's black neighborhood, Greenwood, with white mobs attacking homes, businesses, and churches. White pilots flew planes overhead, dropping incendiary bombs and shooting at black residents. Greenwood was destroyed, with the entire city blocks reduced to ashes, leaving thousands of black residents homeless and displaced. Greenwood was left in ruins. The Oklahoma National Guard was deployed to restore order, but not before the devastation was complete. Over the next 24 hours, the mob destroyed 35 city blocks, burned over 1,200 homes. Although official reports at the time glossed over the carnage, claiming only 36 lives lost, 26 blacks, 10 whites. But the Red Cross, witnessing the devastation firsthand, estimated a staggering 300 fatalities. The NAACP, Fighting for Justice, believed the true number lay between 150 to 200. In the end, It didn't matter what really happened in that elevator. The damage was done. The seeds of hatred and violence that had been sown, and the city of Tulsa would never be the same again. The violence was not merely a reaction to the elevator incident, but a manifestation of long-held racial hatred and fear, fueled by systemic oppression and discrimination. The Tulsa race riot still remains one of the darkest chapters in American history. 2. Rosewood, Florida.
The town of Rosewood was a small, predominantly black community not too far from Gainesville. It was destroyed at the hands of an angry racist mob. All that's left, their descendants who continue to tell their stories.
It was almost like this picture-perfect place.
On January 5th, 1923, a mob of over 200 white men attacked the black community in Rosewood, Florida, killing over 30 black women, men, and children, burning the town to the ground, and forcing all survivors to permanently flee Rosewood. This is what went down. On January 1st, 1923, in Sumner, Florida, a young married white woman named Fannie Taylor claimed she had been assaulted by Jesse Hunter, a black man who had escaped a prison chain gang. Though there was no evidence against Mr. Hunter, local white men launched a manhunt in Rosewood, a nearby town of about 200 black people. On January 2nd, a mob of white men kidnapped, tortured, and lynched Sam Carter, a black craftsman from Rosewood, on the suspicion that he had helped Jesse Hunter escape. White mobs would continue to terrorize Rosewood searching for Mr. Hunter, and black residents would arm themselves in defense. Late on the night of January 4th, a white posse fired into the home of black Rosewood resident Sylvester Carrier, whom they suspected of harboring Mr. Hunter, and killed an elderly woman. A gunfight between Carrier and the mob would last into the early morning, killing people on both sides. Outraged that black residents had fought back, the posse left the scene to regroup and returned with more men. On January 5th, a mob of between 200 to 300 white men attacked Rosewood, killing an estimated 30 to 40 black men, women, and children on sight, and burning the town to the ground. Most black residents would later flee into the woods, while others fled by train to Gainesville, Florida, never to return. Survivors later recounted that Fannie Taylor had made false accusations against Jesse Hunter to conceal her extramarital affair with a white man. Number 3, Washington, D.C. In the sweltering summer of 1919, Washington, D.C. was a city on edge. The Great War had ended, but the fight for equality and justice had only just begun. African-American soldiers, fresh from battling for democracy abroad, returned home to find themselves denied the same rights and respect they had fought for. Tensions simmered, fueled by housing shortages, job competition, and the ever-present specter of racial prejudice. The city's streets were a powder keg, waiting for a spark to ignite the flames of violence. That spark came on July 20, 1919, when a white woman accused a black man of assault. White men, many in the armed forces, responded to the rumored arrest of a black man for the rape of a white woman, with 4 days of mob violence against black individuals and businesses. They rioted randomly, beating black people on the street and pulling others off streetcars for attacks. When the police refused to intervene, the black population fought back. The violence raged on for days. Sounds of gunfire, screams, and shattering glass filled the air as the city teetered on the brink of chaos. In the end, the riots left deep scars on the city and its people. The death toll mounted with at least 15 lives lost and over 150 injured, with property damage of over $100,000 to $200,000, approximately $1.5 million to $3 million in today's dollars. This left the streets littered with the remnants of shattered lives and broken dreams. Number 4, Colfax, Louisiana. On April 13, 1873, a white militia attacked the town of Colfax, Louisiana, killing an estimated 60 to 150 black residents. The violence was sparked by a disputed gubernatorial election, with white Democrats seeking to overthrow the newly elected Republican government. The militia, mostly ex-Confederates, targeted the town's black majority, who had been exercising their newfound voting rights. The attackers used cannons, guns, and fire to destroy the town, killing many black residents, including women and children. Some were shot while trying to surrender, while others were burned alive in their homes. Despite the fact that the Colfax decimation made national headlines at the time, the incident was quickly forgotten. In 1921, local officials erected a memorial to the 3 white militia members who died. The inscription on the memorial calls the white militia members heroes who died fighting for white supremacy. To a large extent, these actions show that they had complete disregard for the value of the black lives lost. The Colfax Massacre was a brutal example of racial terrorism, aimed at suppressing black political power and maintaining white supremacy in Louisiana. The event marked the end of Reconstruction in the state and led to the rise of Jim Crow laws. Only 3 white men were ever charged, and none were convicted. Number 5, Thibodaux, Louisiana. The Thibodaux liquidation, a dark and pivotal event in American history, unfolded in the sleepy town of Thibodaux, Louisiana, in November 1887. This tragic incident was the culmination of a long, simmering labor dispute between African-American sugarcane workers and white planters, set against the backdrop of the post-Reconstruction era's racial tensions. In the late 19th century, Louisiana's sugar industry was booming, with Thibodaux at its epicenter. Thousands of African-American workers toiled in the fields, often under grueling conditions and for meager wages. As the Knights of Labor and the Louisiana Sugarcane League began organizing workers, demands for better pay, working conditions, and union recognition grew louder. On November 1st, 1887, approximately 10,000 workers went on strike, refusing to return to the fields until their demands were met. The strike's leaders, including prominent African-American activists, called for peaceful protest and negotiation. However, local white planters and law enforcement saw the strike as a threat to their power and profits. The situation escalated on November 2nd, when white vigilantes, including local law enforcement and sugar planters, attacked striking workers in their homes. Clashes erupted, and violence spread throughout Thibodaux. Over the next few days, white mobs rampaged through the town, killing an estimated number of 30 to 60 African Americans, although some reports put the death toll higher. The violence was brutal and indiscriminate, with workers, their families, and even bystanders targeted. Many were shot, beaten, or lynched, their bodies left in the streets or dumped in the bayou. Most homes were burnt. The local jail was filled with hundreds of African Americans, arrested and imprisoned without charges, forced to sign contracts agreeing to work for lower wages. Mary P. Terrell, a prominent African American activist, investigated the massacre and advocated for justice. She documented the atrocities and pushed for accountability, but her efforts were met with resistance and silence. Louisiana Governor Samuel Douglas McHenry failed to intervene, allowing the violence to escalate. His inaction emboldened the perpetrators and sent a chilling message that such brutality would be tolerated. In the aftermath, investigations were limited and inconclusive, with no convictions for the perpetrators. The Thibodaux annihilation remained largely unreported or distorted by contemporary accounts. Today, the Thibodaux massacre stands as one of the deadliest incidents of racial violence in U.S. history, a stark reminder of the brutal suppression of African American labor activism during the Jim Crow era. The legacy of this tragedy continues to reverberate, a call to remember and confront the dark corners of America's past. Number 6, Wilmington, North Carolina. The Wilmington, North Carolina annihilation was a tale of politics, power, and racial hatred that culminated in one of the most devastating incidents of racial violence in American history. It began with the rise of the Fusion Party, a coalition of Republicans and populists who sought to challenge the Democratic Party's stranglehold on North Carolina politics. In 1898, the Fusion Party swept the municipal elections in Wilmington, North Carolina's largest city, electing a biracial government. This victory was seen as a threat by the Democratic Party and the city's white elite, who feared the loss of their power and privilege. A campaign of intimidation and disinformation was launched, with Democratic leaders and newspapers whipping up racial tensions and spreading false rumors of African American aggression. The situation escalated when a white newspaper editor, Josephus Daniels, published an inflammatory editorial that sparked outrage among African Americans. On November 10, 1898, a group of African American leaders attempted to respond to Daniels' editorial, but their meeting was disrupted by a white mob. The violence quickly spread, with white rioters attacking African American homes, businesses, and citizens. The Wilmington Light Infantry and the North Carolina Naval Reserves were called in, But instead of restoring order, they joined the white mobs, killing and driving out African American residents. Estimates suggest that between about 300 African Americans were killed and thousands more were forced to flee the city. The aftermath was just as shocking. The biracial government was overthrown, and many African American leaders were forced into exile. The Democratic Party reasserted its control, and the city's African American population was left to pick up the pieces. For all the violent moments in United States history, the mob's gruesome attack was unique. It was the only coup d'etat ever to take place on American soil. Lost in the fire that destroyed the daily record were the lives of black citizens and the spirit of a thriving black community, and also the most promising effort in the South to build racial solidarity. Number 7, St. Louis, Missouri. On July 3rd, 1917, continuing violence raged in East St. Louis, Illinois, as white mobs attacked black residents and destroyed their homes and other properties. The primary outbreak of violence began on July 2nd, 1917, when white residents of East St. Louis and other nearby communities ambushed African American workers as they left factories during a shift change. The National Guard was called in to suppress the violence, but they were ordered not to shoot at white rioters. Some troops reportedly joined the mobs targeting the black community. A quick throwback into the year 1916 and 1917. Thousands of blacks made a massive exodus from the rural South to East St. Louis in search of industrial work. White residents, along with the city's political leaders, attempted to discourage black migration and prohibited railroads from transporting black people to the region. When these attempts failed, white residents would begin using violence to intimidate, expel, and destroy the African American population. From July 2nd through July 5th, 1917, estimates showed that as many as 200 African Americans were shot, hanged, beaten to death, and others burnt alive after being driven into burning buildings. The riots had caused more than $400,000 in property damage. More than half of East St. Louis's African American population fled the city. While 105 people were indicted on charges related to the riot, only 20 members of the white mob received prison sentences for their roles in perpetrating the extreme violence and killings. Number 8, Omaha, Nebraska. The Omaha race riot of 1919 was a devastating event that wiped out the city's thriving black neighborhood, known as the Near North Side. The riot was sparked by a false accusation of assault against a black man, Will Brown, by a white woman, Agnes Williams. This incident was the catalyst for a long simmering cauldron of white racism and resentment towards the black community. For years, white Omahans had been resentful of the growing economic and social success of the black community. They saw the Near North Side as a thriving hub of black culture and entrepreneurship, with successful businesses, churches, and homes. This perceived success was a threat to the white status quo, fueling feelings of jealousy and anger. On September 28, 1919, a white mob, estimated to be around 4,000 strong, descended upon the Near North Side, determined to destroy the black community. They burned homes, businesses, and churches, leaving nothing but smoldering ruins in their wake. The mob attacked black residents, beating and shooting anyone who stood in their way. The riot lasted for 2 days, with the police and authorities doing little to stop the violence. When the dust settled, the Near North Side was in ruins. Over 1,000 black residents had been displaced, their homes and livelihoods destroyed. The once thriving neighborhood was now a desolate wasteland, a testament to the destructive power of white racism. The Omaha race riot was not just a random act of violence, it was a deliberate attempt to erase the black community from the city's landscape. It was a manifestation of the deep-seated racial prejudices that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. The riot was a stark reminder of the long history of white racism and violence against black people in America, a history that continues to have devastating consequences to this day. Number 9, Chicago, Illinois. The summer of 1919 was hot and tense in Chicago's South Side. Racial tensions had been building for months, with white and black residents competing for jobs, housing, and space. On July 27, 1919, a group of white men threw rocks at Eugene Williams, a 17-year-old black teenager, for accidentally crossing an unofficial segregation line at the 29th Street beach. Williams tried to swim away, but was struck again and drowned. The news of Williams' death spread quickly through the black community, and residents gathered at the beach demanding justice. However, instead of arresting the white men involved, a white police officer, Daniel Callahan, arrested a black man, James Crawford, who had tried to help Williams. This sparked outrage and anger among black residents who felt that the police were protecting the white attackers. Over the next few days, skirmishes broke out between white and black groups, with rock throwing and fistfights. The violence escalated, with white mobs attacking black residents and businesses. Black residents fought back, leading to clashes between the two groups. The Chicago Police Department struggled to contain the violence, with some officers joining in the attacks on black residents. As the violence spread, the Illinois National Guard was deployed to quell the rioting. However, their presence did little to stop the violence, and white mobs continued to attack black residents. Reports of lynching and shootings filled the newspapers, and the city teetered on the brink of chaos. It wasn't until July 31st, 1919, that the violence began to subside, with the National Guard maintaining a presence on the streets and a curfew in place. However, the damage had already been done. 38 people had been killed, 537 injured, and over 1,000 black people left homeless. The riot had destroyed over 100 black-owned businesses, leaving the community reeling. Number 10, Springfield, Illinois. On August 14, 1908, a white mob attacked Springfield, Illinois' black community, killing 6 to 12 people and injuring over 100. The violence began with a false accusation of rape against a black man, leading to a rampage of arson, beatings, and shootings. White rioters targeted black businesses and homes, destroying over 40 buildings. The mob's goal was to intimidate and suppress the city's growing black population, which had been experiencing economic and social advancements. The massacre was a brutal display of white supremacy, aimed at maintaining racial hierarchy and control in Springfield. Going forward, the gruesome liquidation of blacks in all 10 cities were brutal and devastating events that targeted just black communities, perpetuated by white supremacy and racial hatred. They resulted in the loss of countless lives, displacement, and destruction of property. These events were not isolated incidents, but rather part of a larger pattern of racial violence and terrorism that aimed to maintain white dominance and suppress black progress. The lack of accountability and justice for these atrocities is a painful reminder of the ongoing struggle for racial equality and justice in America. Remembering and learning from these dark chapters in history is crucial for building a more equitable future. That brings us to the end of yet another video at the moment. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the painful past of Black American families. We hope you found this episode informative and thought-provoking. Share your thoughts and opinions with us. Your feedback is valuable. Stay tuned for the second part of this video, where we'll continue the history of Black ghost towns. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.